Hi everyone, welcome. I'm out here in my yard preparing to feed my outdoor worm system, and they're getting an assortment of melon. It's both watermelon and cantaloupe melon, and I found a couple slices of bread that started to look a little bit moldy, so that's going to go in there as worm food as well. This system out here has been in service for 80 days, and today's going to be feeding number 8, so I didn't need to take notes on that. That was pretty easy to remember. And 12 days ago was our last check-in on this system. Those worms in there got an assortment of different types of vegetables last time, so today we're switching them over to fruit. The vegetables they got last time was stuff like carrot peel and cucumber peel, if memory serves me correctly. So I'm curious to see how they're coming along. There's rain expected later today, so I thought I'd get out here before it hits to try to take care of getting these little guys set up with their next feeding. And I also thought that maybe we would use that as an opportunity to let the system receive some rainwater, if we were to sense that maybe things in here are in need of additional moisture. Luckily, we've been protecting this system from excess drying by placing some plastic in between the two layers of fabric grow bag, because this is actually not just one fabric grow bag but two, one nested within the other with a little bit of plastic hidden in between, and the job of the plastic is to protect the system from losing its moisture, and it seems like it's been doing a really good job. It was usually out here on the very outer edge of the system where I would often notice that's the moisture was sort of escaping, and that up against the very wall of the container I would find that the material was rather dry, and because of that no worms wanted to hang out there. But I'm going right up to the edge at this point, scooping a material away from the edge of the container just to see what it feels like, and I could feel on my fingers nice and cool, nice and damp material, and even worms hanging out in it, which is a good sign too. That's usually validation to me that the material is comfortable enough to support worm activity. We collectively came up with an estimate for how many worms occupy this system, so I always feel really thankful that I've got viewers out there that like to engage with me in my videos through the comments and provide their input. Because something I like to do in all my worm bins, not just this one, is get input from the viewers when I launch a new system to come up with some sort of an estimate on how many worms occupy the bin. And with everyone's input, we came up with a pretty nice figure of over 1,000 worms living in here. The exact number is 1,150. That's our estimated worm count for this system. And it wasn't such a nice round even number either. It was just a few check-ins ago that we took a few worms that actually live beneath the trash pail in which this whole thing is situated. So underneath the bag itself is a piece of plywood propped up with a pot, a pretty good size clay pot, to get the level of it up nice and high to where it makes it easy for me to work on over here. So sometimes I take a peek under the trash pail to see if there's any worms gathering under there, and there usually are, a few at least. And at one point we had collected up a couple dozen, no, not even that many, I think it was 19, but 19 was just the magic number we needed to round out the estimated worm count in this system to 1,150. And I like that number, but you know, you got to assume that that number is constantly changing, hopefully in an upwards direction, with the worms mating and dropping off cocoons as a result of that, and then the cocoons yielding baby worms. I have definitely noticed a lot of baby worms showing up in some of my systems down in my wormery. It seems like as the warmer summer weather rolls in, the mating of the worms seems to increase. And you got to admit, this is a pretty good sized system compared to some of the bus bins that I run inside, or at least it feels that way as far as just amount of material. And to launch only 1,150 worms into a system this size, I think gives gives the worm population plenty of room to expand their numbers. So I think in these early days, at day 80, we would have to consider this as a fairly young bin still. It seems like a somewhat underpopulated system, but I think that'll change by the end of the summer. I think the worms will, take advantage of the available space that they've got in here and propagate their numbers out to a point where we're probably going to see a pretty nice, heavily populated system over here. I did notice during previous check-ins, I checked out the videos, and it did seem like we were always sort of just burrowing down into the middle of the bin to see how the leftovers of the previous feeding were holding up, but never really spending a whole lot of time on the outer edges. I would once in a while just sample the material just to see if it was maintaining a comfortable moisture level for the worms. But I really was curious to maybe go around the bin a little bit like I've been doing here for the past couple minutes to really try to see if there's material that's maybe kind of matted up against itself, like I'm noticing right here. It clearly doesn't prevent the worms from kind of burrowing down into the material. As you can see, there's a couple worms in it. In fact, sometimes I wonder if the pressure is something that they even crave. They like to get in between tight spaces and work their way into things where there seems to be pressure. So I don't know, maybe that's actually something that the worms crave. But I like the idea of sort of aerating the material and dislodging it from itself if I can once in a while. But if I were to do nothing, I'm sure things would be just fine. This is also kind of bringing some of the nice moist material that's down at the bottom up. Here and there I'm noticing little pockets of drier stuff. Like here, this section of the bin, maybe there's not as much plastic cover in between the two layers of fabric grow bag, because I know that the fabric grow bag doesn't have protection going all the way around with plastic in between. It's mostly got plastic in between, but there are spots where I didn't get an entire coverage going around, so those sections might tend to get a little bit drier. But in general, it does seem to me like the moisture content in here is quite nice. As I blend in some of the drier stuff I have in here from the surface and from some of these sections around the edge, and I combine it with the more damp stuff that I'm excavating from below, and as I'm aerating and combining stuff, I am starting to get the sense that allowing rain to fall in here would be unnecessary. I mean, it will fall in here either way, but my idea was to maybe leave it uncovered so that the entire top surface could get rained on, but I really don't think it's going to be needed. So we're just going to cover up the way we normally do with that nice colorful piece of plywood, because you got to also factor in the type of food that you're giving them. The melon that they're getting, I would say that a large percentage of that material is just water, so it's going to bring with it additional moisture down into the center of the bin. So I think we're just fine as far as moisture goes in here. No need to take advantage of the rain coming later today by leaving it uncovered. Yeah, I like the idea of unmatting some of this material that's down low. You can even see some of the material that this system was built with was some of the shredded paper cardboard that I usually use downstairs in my worm bins. A lot of times I'll just build these outdoor systems using materials from out here, leaves and stuff like that, but in the case of this system, we did utilize some of the shredded paper and cardboard that I normally use down in my wormery. So I think we've made our way more or less around the whole system. We don't have to be 100% thorough. I thought we'd eventually sort of breach the middle ground of the system and get a little peek at how the last feeding is coming along. I don't know, after 12 days it is possible that we'll see no signs of it, but it does seem to me like we've managed to somehow avoid it. The feeding they got last time was a couple coffee filters into which we placed the food, and it kind of made me wonder if those coffee filters would still show up here as leftovers. So at this point I'm really just going directly to the middle section of the bin, where there's definitely more worms, like a somewhat more concentrated jumble of worms. This sort of system with this many worms living in it, considering the amount of space they have to live in, I don't think is going to be one where we're going to encounter many major worm balls. But maybe around a food item like this. This is a mango seed that I had chopped in half, so there is another half of this thing somewhere very similar in appearance that might also have some worms hanging around on it. But I didn't really see any signs of the two coffee filters into which we placed all those shredded carrot peels and cucumber peels. So maybe they just did away with that stuff. Although maybe we'll still bump into some. I mean, right there, I think that might actually be a little... Could it be? No, maybe not. No big deal. I guess my only thing was to see if we can unearth that other piece of mango seed, that other half of that mango seed that we just examined a moment ago. But if we don't find it, it's not that important. I was just curious to see if it too is in the same sort of state of decomposition. There's no reason to think that would be much different, but I am always kind of curious to see things. But you know, I think we've already disrupted this environment for these little guys more than they would appreciate in normal circumstances. At this point, we've probably disrupted pretty much every every bit of this container, making the worms probably wonder, hey, what the heck is going on here? So I don't think it's necessary to continue tilling around here and disrupting things any further. Why don't we just take that half of a mango seed and place it right back down where we found it, in the middle of the bin, except right there inside the husk. The husk is still quite tough, but underneath that little piece of the chopped in half seed, right inside the husk, the worms are really enjoying that little hideout. So I figured I'd put that seed right back into there. This has got to be part of the coffee filter that was used. Part of the 2 coffee filters that were used last time. I'm a little bit surprised that we didn't encounter more of it. So alright, I'm just having a little bit too much fun here. Let's press on and get this feeding taken care of. I figured we'd start out with a couple of these moldy chunks of bread. Usually if I put bread into my systems, the stuff just sort of sits there and becomes mold if it's not thoroughly dampened, and this is dry. But if we were to place some material smack on top of it, that's going to probably kick out a little bit of moisture. Since this melon was all frozen, as it thaws out, I believe it's going to release some of its moisture. Oh my goodness, loud truck just went by. Presumably it snuffed out what I was trying to say there. Apologies for the noise pollution. So yeah, I'm assuming that by placing all this nice moisture-rich food directly on top of the bread, it's going to dampen the bread to the point where it'll also become delicious worm food. And you know, I had thought about maybe doing something similar to the last check-in by using these coffee filters to envelop the food into, but maybe we'll just use them at this point as sort of coverings. This coffee filter just came out of the coffee maker, so it's still kind of damp and still has some coffee stuck to it. This one I bought up from the wormery, and what I did was I actually used it as a vessel for bringing up a little bit of pulverized eggshell. That's the other reason I wanted to sort of save these for last, because it was containing something that I usually like to sprinkle on top of the foods. The grit. Pulverized eggshell is just something that the worms will utilize as grit. And that's pretty much their feeding. Alright, well, it does feel to me like this might have been a somewhat longer check-in with the outdoor worm system than we would normally have. But it was kind of fun just to explore how things are doing down in here, to work our way all the way around just to gauge the moisture content, which is something I've been somewhat curious of, but I really wanted to sort of verify that what I was assuming to be going on in here was in fact the case, that the material is nice and damp throughout, comfortable for the worms to be in through and through, and that covering back up the way we normally do is probably the best bet at this point. Like I said, the rain does get in here because this is the only coverings that they get, but the rain usually ends up obviously making its way around this piece of plywood through which the rain cannot pass, and then by being out there I assume it has an easier way out to evaporate versus making all its way down into the bin. I really don't know for sure. Perhaps by going in and being under the plywood and then being contained by the plastic in between the grow bags, maybe it does stay in there. But I'm not really 100% sure. It just feels to me like by covering up at least the middle portion is somewhat protected from getting too damp. And then it's the outer edges that do seem to have the greater ability to release some of their moisture, is where the rain normally falls. So that's it for our check-in with the outdoor worm bag. Hopefully you enjoyed this. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. Alright everyone, thanks for watching. Have a great day. Bye now.